Hi guys, Jia here, and thank you so much for joining me in another episode of the Lives RI podcast. In today's episode, I have a business advisor, career coach with me. 2020 has not been an easy year for most of us, and the pandemic has brought about a lot of anxiety, uncertainty, especially towards our career, if you are an employee. And I think for the business owners, it hasn't been easy as well, having to deal with cash flow, having to deal with tight business. And for some of us, unfortunately, we even had to deal with like retrenchment or even the cutting down of staff labor force. So today, I'm going to be talking with Cheyenne. I keep mispronouncing your name, Cheyenne, sorry.
It's okay.
I'm going to talk about Cheyenne about her business advising, consulting business practice, and also what she does as a career coach, helping people advance their career and making them a better version of themselves. She's also someone who has been a huge advocate of neurodivergent people. She herself has come out with adult ADHD, and we are going to be talking a bit about her struggles with adult ADHD and how she has managed to deal with it over the years as well. Cheyenne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming down and doing this with me. I was looking at my LinkedIn profile with you, and we connected on November 2019.
Yep.
So it's been about a year
Yes.
since we met. What have you been up to basically for the pandemic year 2020?
I was doing a bit of coaching and a bit of business advisory, but also getting clarity and also sharing a lot more about ADHD, special needs and all this. So I've been quite busy with that.
So before that, what were you doing?
Before that, I have been in many careers in my life. I've been in the social sector, doing consulting. I have been in civil service, doing HR strategies. Before that, even my first career, I was a biologist.
Biology where?
Biologist, at different places. I was in A-Star the longest.
Okay.
So I did diabetes research, all this, inject mice with like certain stuff to do studies. Yeah, so it's quite a different career.
Your career has been like a mix of being technical, and you also have a background in psychology as well. How does that help in what you do, having these two skill sets combined together?
I would say that it gives me very good, technical knowledge, the ability to read scientific journals, to understand what researchers are talking about. But the human factor or the people factor is what puts me at an advantage compared to a lot of my peers, be it in research or even in other places. As we know that usually technical people are not the best at dealing with people. With my people skills, I've been able to barter multi-million collaborations, be helping C-suite leaders resolve some of their people issues, because sometimes it does affect very long term for maybe an institute's viability and all this. Then all this, it gives me a better scientific grounding, because in psychology, there's a lot of woo-woo pseudoscience, like, if someone fidgets a lot, then the person is telling a lie.
Yep.
But I have ADHD, I need to fidget to focus. So I would say it has helped me in both sides, because I'm able to do what a lot of researchers find difficult to do. And in dealing with people side, I have the analytical skills. I look at the situation and see and brainstorm, be it drawing from my interdisciplinary backgrounds, what can be possible to solve a situation. It might not be the most typical way of solving something, but it comes from a lot of ideas, be it like physics, chemistry, psychology, or even just learning about human behavior as a whole. But I would say that this human behavior thing has always been an obsession for me, because when I was a kid, I really didn't understand why people behave in a certain way. But the obsession with human behavior has helped me survive secondary school, university. Despite all my learning difficulties, it became excellent for masking up my inadequacies, because it was only when I failed my PhD, then I my house of cards fell. And I realized that, oh, okay, I actually have this. And I've just been using a lot of coping mechanisms and a lot of external help that I've gathered over the years to kind of fly by. Yeah.
As a kid, what aspects of human behavior were you most intrigued or were you most perplexed with?
As a kid, I didn't understand why people needed to agree on face value, but yet resent the person when the person is no longer around.
Like the adult world thing.
Yeah, the whole adult world thing, being courteous. And I observe a person's face, and then I will see the changes in the face. What does it link to? What kind of action? So everything, it was from a very analytical point of view. So doing things in a certain sequence might mean that the person might have a certain facial expression, might do or say certain things, and the outcome is usually a certain parameter. That's how I thought when I was a kid.
One of your first initial things that you did was as a career coach. What do you do as a career, what is a career coach?
Usually career coaches help people advance in their career, or now it's very popular to help the PMETs reskill, to find a new career, or even to ace that interview. It may be a virtual interview, group interview, cognitive tests, like how you can get to even a recruiter to notice you, all this. It's also the principles of attention, the principles of influence, a lot of these, or even attraction. You need to be appealing to the HR recruiter in a certain sense. And a lot of career coaches have been recruiters, they are HR managers, so they kind of school you on the typical normal way of doing things. But because of my background in biology, I approach things in a different way, that let's talk about results and what might be able to drive someone to that result. Yeah.
Can you give me an example of it? Like, let's say I come to you and I want to advance my career. What exactly do you advise people on?
I will find out what is holding you back first.
Okay.
So it's the problem. What is your pain? Do you really want to be a leader of people? There are young adults that I have advised. They love the role of being a leader, but they do not understand what it means and the consequences. So let's take, for example, this young man that I've advised before. He wanted to be a leader because he just wanted people to follow him in whatever he wanted to do. And when I asked him, are you willing to change ABC about your behavior? Are you willing to get buy-in from these people? Are you willing to even learn to be more charismatic, articulate? And he realized that he actually was not happy to do all those things just for the followers. He actually just liked his technical work. So that's how I go about doing it. I don't take clients immediately because it may not be what you really want. Yeah.
People sometimes lack awareness about what they really want. And I suppose they discover about that when they talk to people like you, career coaches.
Yeah, in the sense that I have a bit of a brashness. I will ask the uncomfortable questions, which maybe in Asia, a lot of people don't ask uncomfortable questions. And I will ask them, everything has a price to pay. Are you willing to pay the price? And usually I give them space because there are coaches who are a bit more salesy, or maybe there are other people who are a bit more salesy. They try to close at the spot. But for me, it's a lot more pain if you don't know what you really want, and it may lead you on a path that makes you very unhappy because that's not who you are. And if that is so, I would rather help you be aware of your misery and find a better path for yourself faster.
Is there a difference between holding a job and having a career?
Holding a job, you are just, let's say you have a job at Google, you're just a Googler. Whereas a career, it's your whole life. It's up to you to craft what you want, what is the result. And a lot of people may say that stay 1 year at your job minimum or stay 5 years. But is that really your proper career path? Because your career path might actually be being excellent at whatever task you do, and it is good for you. Because if I promote you out of your competence, you might be miserable. The people under you will be miserable because you are miserable with yourself. So a career is very much what gives us satisfaction. I tell a lot of the young people, you should enjoy at least 50% of what you do, at least. There's no perfect work, but a good part you do enjoy. At least the type of work or even the people that you interact with. It depends on what your core values are.
So at least 50% of all the ups and downs you enjoy. That's fair enough. I mean, like you said, there's no perfect career and there's no perfect match with what we do. I mean, even whatever you like about your work, there will be some part of it that you probably are not so good at. And like one thing I always tell people is you can try as much as possible to try to delegate what you're not so good at, if that's possible. But for some people on their job, it might not be so practical. What about this difference between, like, people hear a lot about what Jack Ma says about when you're young, you want to find someone who can be a mentor to you. What's the difference between finding a mentor and approaching someone like a career coach like what you do?
A mentor is, because I've been fortunate to have a lot of mentors who they themselves used to be C-suite, then they come with a huge variety of life experiences. Sometimes the mentoring process is very messy because a mentor sees that you may be unhinged at a certain point, totally lacking awareness. It may not have been something you agreed to in the initial coaching conversation, but they see that that part is spilling to all other areas. They would probably try to address it. They kind of walk with you. They don't force you to a certain goal or outcome. A coach is more outcome or goal specific. You are working towards something that usually is a bit more tangible. Even if it's not tangible, there is a clear endpoint to it. In a sense, an athlete to win the Olympics, that is what a coach does, to train everything in order for you to reach that goal. A mentor gives a broader view, and it also depends on your relationship with the mentor too. Yeah.
So a lot of people, like, you talk about athletes, right? A lot of people might feel that, why do I need a coach? Because coaches are for like athletes, are for like sports people. How do you talk to them and convince them that what they need is like a coach, or in a sense a third person perspective to tell them, to point out their blind spots or to analyze a certain situation with them and to help them further their career and become a better version of themselves and at their work?
Well, one simple illustration is how many of us keep to our New Year resolutions by June?
Or by
few.
March.
Oh, yeah. Or especially like, I want to hit the gym once a week. Look at how quickly that evaporates. A friend jokes that a lot of gyms earn a lot of money through all these memberships of
People who don't turn up.
Yeah. And enthusiasm.
Or people turn up once in a while.
Yeah. So you need someone else to hold you accountable. You can do it yourself. There are people who do it, like they declare their goals every time on social media. Like, let's say I want to do 50 push-ups a day, and they clock it as a journey, as a challenge. It may be something to help you get started too. I mean, but the other person perspective is not something easily sought. One thing, friends and family, sometimes you are surrounded by very supportive people. They might not tell you the painful truth. That doesn't help in growth, because it is usually through pain that we grow. Whereas if a coach is hired specifically to keep you accountable to something, like someone I coach, I just mentioned to him, I said, okay, these are the things that you agree you need to do by the end of this week. If not, then you would have to donate. You're not giving money to me. You'll have to donate to an organization that you absolutely detest. You just need to show me the receipt. It's like, I think at that point it was donating for Trump to get reelected. That kind of thing. So you do need someone and there is this very strange thing about human nature. The more I pay, the more valuable it is to me. So if it comes for free, I used to do quite a bit of volunteer work. People don't really value the advice you give. Whereas you look at Warren Buffett, of course, he's a very different level. But look at the amounts people pay just to have, I think, a meal with him once a year. Then they take his advice almost as if it was the oracles of the gods. Yeah, so it's something like this where you pay, it costs you something, and because there's a constant reminder, then you are more motivated to be less sucky. After a while, you get sick of yourself also for consistently not meeting something. Of course, don't let it spill into mental health issues, but it's to keep your eyes on the goal. And we may not get that with friends, families, colleagues even.
At the end of the day, people who come to you and you work with them, what do you hope, what do you aspire for them to achieve?
I would really hope that they enjoy the things that they do. I'm a bit of a reformed workaholic, so this is a bit more on my selfish side, that people do enjoy the work that they do. Then it's also for people to have clarity, and for a lot of people that I coach or advise on, it is also to be a leader and influence their individual spheres of influence well. Because I think we've seen too many warped leadership. I think it's time for a lot more people to distribute that power a lot more, because you have, let's just say, more safety nets.
Okay, in an organization.
Yeah, because if you just hinge on one leader per se, maybe like Steve Jobs, then now people kind of make a mockery of Apple in some sense because they have stopped innovating after Steve Jobs has died. I would say that I would aspire for a lot of the people I coach, or even business owners that I advise on, that they can influence their sphere of people, like be it their employees, and it's usually disproportionate. We don't expect an Arab Spring where someone lights themselves on fire and creates a revolution. A leader can institute ethical changes bit by bit in a way that is a lot more effective than one person trying to torch themselves.
So this process can take a long while, right?
It takes a long
to
while.
change like the culture of an organization, number one, or for someone to even take your advice and make internal change within themselves.
Yes.
To take your advice and become. I think people always have this thing that stumbles, and that's ego. People can't get past through themselves.
Yeah, so I don't work with everyone because the last thing I'd want is for the ego to totally consume a person. And if the ego totally consumes a person, even at the level before they are an influential leader, I do not want the effects of influence to be added to this person in addition to their ego issues. So I work with a very niche group. They need to be willing to take action, to really want to do more or contribute for the betterment of society. And ego is something that trips up everyone. So it is something that they need to be open for it to be pointed out. And it is a long process. I don't work with clients just like a flash in a pan, because these take very long time. Human behavior, like some will joke, some will never change even the day before they get to the grave. Yeah.
You know, in the last year, because of the circuit breaker and the pandemic, there has been a lot more self-awareness, and a lot of people who are like, what can I do to improve myself? What new skills can I pick up during the circuit breaker, for example? There was even this girl online who said that, if you learn nothing new during the circuit breaker, then you ought to be ashamed of yourself, blah blah blah. Where does coaching fits in terms of self-development and personal development?
I would say coaching helps a person move the needle. It is good to have self-awareness, but as a term in army, they say, you think I thought, who confirm?
Mm.
So you may think about certain things yourself, but if you do not work with other people, suitable people for sure, who brings out other sides that you tend to ignore, we all have blind spots, and it's easier, like what the Chinese say, 旁观者清. Someone living with you, someone who sees your little behavior, they'll point it out to you that, hey, this is a blind spot. This could be what triggers like conflicts in your relationships. And this process, a lot of coaches are very good with this also. So it doesn't matter what type of coach you go for. There is a coaching process. They will get these answers out of yourself, because sometimes it is actually within the person. It's just that they have not the right questions, nor the right tools to discover, oh, I'm actually this and that.
Am I right to say that, this whole idea about coaching and business advisory is still more of like a Western concept and culture kind of thing, and the Asian culture still haven't seemed to pick up on it so much yet?
I would say maybe it's a bit more of the modern Asian culture, because if you look at Chinese history, or even histories of empires and kingdoms of the Asian countries, all kings have had advisors, panels of advisors, and they usually would have wise men too. They would have the old people with wisdom. And you look at the history, a lot has depended on good advisors, be it people from Zhuge Liang, Sima Yi. I get it that the younger generation, talking to a lot of them, they don't really understand that the roles these people play, but they are very helpful in steering not just organizations, but they can see things and propose ideas, because that's where their talent lies. Yeah. And a lot of, if you look at history, because usually I think there's a certain amount of truth that when you don't study history, you are doomed to repeat its mistakes. So when you look at the dynasties that fell and all this, it's not for the lack of advisors per se, but probably either taking bad advice from people who are yes people, or people who just want to make use of whoever is in power for their own means.
忠言逆耳.
Yes.
I'm a huge fan of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, so I immediately understand where you're coming from when you talk about Zhuge Liang and Sima Yi.
Yeah.
And even today, like we talk about like the Singapore system, right? The president, despite her, you can say mainly ceremonial powers, but there's the Council of Wise Men, the Presidential Council.
Yep.
That advises the president on important decisions, because when a president makes a decision, it's like when the Prime Minister advises the president to make a decision, but the decision at the end of the day lies with the president, right?
Yes.
And the president consults the council, and they come up with I suppose they put their heads together before the president makes a final decision.
And at least looks at the data, don't make wild assumptions, or even sometimes even a reality check, like, is your intuition really correct at this point? We know that a lot of leaders emphasize the power of their intuition, but I love Malcolm Gladwell's books. There's one point I would like to, a lot of people say, yes, Malcolm Gladwell's not really scientific, he's just a good storyteller. There is something he points out that Blink, he says that you can trust your intuition only if you have expertise in that field. But when you're a leader, the higher you rise, the less expertise you have in the hundreds and even thousands of domains. You would need advisors who understand that domain to give you good advice. Yes, ultimately you make the judgment, but would you rather have more information, more data, than another case of you think I thought who confirm, and it turns out to be something very dramatically wrong.
So the other work that you do as a business advisor, right? What are some, if you can share with us, like memorable cases of cases that you have dealt with in terms of advising businesses or business owners or the C-suites? Or maybe I can ask, like, what are some of the common issues that they face that you manage to help them with?
Okay, so I'll lump a couple for privacy's sake. One is for sure retention of good people. How do you keep these people happy because they are your high performers? And then even how to let go of people who may be high performers, but they don't gel with everyone in the team.
Destructive high performers.
Yes. It's to draw the line when you want the bottom line boosted, or do you want even your good people to throw in the towel and say, I quit?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's sometimes a reality check. I ask them, what is the worth of your destructive high performer versus your maybe a little clueless performer? They are a bit clueless maybe in the EQ side of things, but they certainly are doing a very good job. They've been helping you a lot too. And I just ask, sometimes it's even just an exercise for them to weigh pros and cons right in front of me, and they themselves will get their own decision.
I have a friend, a very good friend of mine, my best friend actually. He is business owner. He runs a precision engineering outfit. And he has like 1,000 employees across the region, Malaysia and Thailand and Singapore. And he's also a leader in the community as well. He taught me very early on that, especially when dealing with volunteers, and it also applies to his staff as well.
Yep.
He always weigh his people on a scale of level of contribution versus level of destruction.
Yes.
And when the scale tips 51-52% towards level of destruction, right? But it's more destruction more than contribution. Then it's time to be decisive and to let the person go or to chop the person because it's never worth it. But I suppose people always still keep on looking at the level of contribution that the person has, and they close one eye on the destructiveness that the person is causing to the organization.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's why I aspire the people who I consult with, advise. I desire for them to be part of the solution, to not enable toxic workplaces in a certain sense. Because sometimes, I'm not saying that these people who are toxic don't deserve a second chance, but sometimes they need to learn things the hard way. You cannot bulldoze and trample everyone under you just to get performance. I think COVID has raised awareness that we need a lot more care for our mental health. It's not just about the bottom line. And is it worth losing the hearts of people who might be more loyal in exchange for one person who contributes? You can say, yes, the person contributes significantly to our bottom line, but as people in organizational development always say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. You can be the most strategic, smartest boss around. If you cannot handle the day-to-day tensions and
culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yes.
Okay.
This is something that people in organizational development always say, because they, no matter the best strategy, but if your culture is not even toxic, it's just dysfunctional, then how can you expect execution of your strategy? Because people will have infighting. They will spend their energy and resources trying to look better in front of you, but trying to make things not work for other people at the back. Is it worth it?
How do you deal with a stubborn client who, obviously the problem is there and the solution is there, the advice has been proposed, but they're just stubborn?
They're just stubborn. I will just say it's not time. Then maybe when they have reached that stage of life where they have learned life's lessons, then sure, I'll talk to them again. I see no point in what they call throwing pearls to swine. It may be very crude, but if I have 100 units of energy, that person has 100 units of energy, is it worth my 100 units just to battle for this one person who refuses to listen? Or is my energy better spent developing people, helping other people, or even solving their issues? Because maybe the stubborn client is just not at the point of desperation. But there may be people who are desperate. Then they may not be able to afford all the solutions you have. But if you are able to help them in their time of desperation, they are grateful. They will refer people to you. Word of mouth and reputation matter a lot more in today's economy than just titles.
Definitely.
Yeah.
How, all these C-suite people or people at higher level who comes to you for advice, right? Are they mostly SMEs or are they MNCs?
SMEs, from the higher level ones, because they have less resources and education, training opportunities to even have people advising them on the people issue. They are usually trying to make the bottom line work. They are trying to do better than survival for a lot of them. So this is a privilege that they don't have compared to an MNC. Then that's where there's a lot more impact, because you are impacting the person who can execute and change decisions in the workplace. You're impacting a lot of lives that are their employees or even other stakeholders. Yeah, so for the SME, it is more of the higher level. Because especially for retention issue, SME is not as attractive as, let's say, civil service or a huge MNC. You don't get the perks. You don't get, the wow when people hear that you work for, let's say, Apple. Yeah. So they fight harder to retain good people. They need to be even better than MNCs.
We saw the news these few days about how Sheng Siong is giving out up to 16 months, bonus to their staff for a year. The boss has considered a tremendous year for them. Of course, their bottom line, their revenue, their bottom line has been boosted by the whole pandemic and all. And they have allocated like 20% of their net profit after taxes to reward everyone. Therefore, the 16 months kind of bonus. That's one way of retaining talents, right? What are some common advice that you give out to people? Because retention of talent is always a concern, whether you're SME or you're MNC, or even if you're just like a self-employed having a PA.
Yes.
What's the biggest advice to retain people?
There are a couple of ways depending on your resources. One is, do you know your high performer well enough to know what motivates them? So that is one question I will ask them. Then next is, are you open to even having maybe like profit sharing? It might be useful for some firms or some industries. Then the other thing is, have you taken care of them in a sense, their mental health, or taken care of them like friends or family? Because this is I will be writing an article on this soon. This is something I propose to some bosses. Have you even considered retaining your employees based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is, survival? If your staff are at survival, obviously they will go to the next highest bidder. But can you offer more than that? Can you offer an environment for them to grow? A safe environment where they can propose radical new stuff. Maybe you may not have the resources, but you can give them a bit of time off to pursue something that's both beneficial to the company and you, but it's their own little project. It can be a lot of ways, not necessarily money. Because at the end of the day, it's a basic human need to want to be seen, to be heard, to be appreciated for who they are.
Do you see the COVID-19 situation becoming a little bit of a blessing in disguise in this sense? So I would think that, for example, as you talk about this, right, I have a high performer, a good employee really, who is, let's say, a working mother. And, she would most likely appreciate a little bit of flexible working hours.
Yep.
Especially when, the kid has something going on in school. But some bosses are just very inflexible in terms of that.
Yeah.
But because of the COVID situation, right, whereby people are now comfortable working from home and all, and you sort of realize that, hey, actually it's possible. And the level of performance can still be there despite having more time at home or spending a bit more family time. So I mean, I've seen this around and I think that one of the good things that came out of this is that bosses actually realize that you don't need to necessarily be in the office to do what you need to do, or even to excel at what you have to do. And it's something that I think it's been a great thing for some of the working mothers.
It is. And I would say that I do desire to push this wave where people don't micromanage, where people can trust people, and in a business sense that you know, maybe the owners who are more humane, the owners who put in a lot more effort, or even the managers or directors who are more human in that sense, the wave will be that in society, the good performers will flock to them.
Mm.
And those who, have you heard of this technology adoption curve? It's a bit like a bell curve. Yeah. So usually you have the early adopters, innovators, and all this. For me, I'm not very concerned with those in the last two quadrants, which are the late adopters or those who until the technology is obsolete. I would rather go with those who are open to new things, and this will drive a wave because there are a lot of people who are sick of the same old, same old. They are sick of no trust. They are sick of, someone shared with me on news that there's this China company that even gave seats, like seat cushions or chairs, so that they can monitor when their staff leaves the seat. It's ridiculous, and I think the high performers have a say. They can say, you know what, I know I'm a really high performer. I don't have to put up with this rubbish.
Yep.
I will choose somewhere else that even maybe if the pay is not that huge, but hey, if I no longer need to work in the city, if I can live somewhere that's maybe a bit more inaccessible, things are cheaper, I don't need to earn such a huge salary and put up with rubbish.
And be happier.
Yes.
You spoke a few times about charisma, influence. How does a leader cultivate his or her charisma and influence over their people?
I would say it starts from internal work also. It's also to know a lot of what you are lacking or what are your blind spots. It's mitigating some of these blind spots so that they don't aggravate people. It's also to develop not just listening skills, the ability to ask good questions. You get people to talk about themselves. It's all this. And or even to tell stories in a way to illustrate your point. It depends a lot on the person. It depends on what they are lacking.
So there's no strict definition for charisma.
There is no strict definition because everyone's slightly different in where they lack charisma. Like, let's look at Richard Branson. A lot of people admire him for his charisma, but he is seen as reckless, brash, and upstart by quite a lot of people who are the more traditional ones. So charisma is also having that knowledge and living it out, that I'm okay if people don't really like me in a certain sense, but to still be polite, to be a good human. You won't attract everyone, but you need to be attractive enough to the people that matter to you also.
Okay, so to put it in more like tangible, because charisma is always something that I feel like is a bit intangible. In fact, I'm someone who will Google like how to be more charismatic. And how to be more charismatic.
I think how to be more charismatic is making the other person a star, if it's a one-to-one basis.
Okay.
Then it's quickly profiling a person to see what works best. Then it is also having come from the point where, I want to be a resource for this person's success. When you think from that mentality, how you say things, how you insist on certain things will change and shift. So sometimes it's the changing of the internal question. It's not about how awkward I am or whether I stutter. Maybe I fidget too much. But it is coming from the point, what can I do or help this person to contribute to their success?
How do you profile people? Is there a profiling test that you use or system that you advocate?
I would say mine is a bit odd because it comes from years of observing people. So it's the unconscious competence. From certain things that you say and do, I will have formed an impression. Then it's in the midst of the conversation, then I will just roughly see, it's like, you poke around the boundaries to kind of see where this person is a bit more sensitive and all
So you don't
this.
use a particular system to profile people?
There are a lot of tools, but most of us will never have this privilege of using the tools. Like, let's take, for example, your networking party. You have 3 seconds to make an impression. You can choose to be an authentic part of you, but it is a specific aspect of you.
But what about the hiring process? You know, let's say when someone comes and apply for a job, is it useful to profile someone?
Okay, so the profiling maybe comes a bit later. We, like how I've advised some of the business owners, let's do it on technical competence first. There is no point in, let's say, hiring a PA, and the PA cannot use calendars tools or scheduling tools. Would you, no matter how good the fit, would you really want to hire this person? Probably not. Then if the person's pretty much a tech idiot and you use all kinds of like Google Calendar, stuff like that, and the person cannot even simulate that task, no. So usually I advise technical competence first. After that pool, it's up to you whether you want to do like a group interview with vibes from other people, because we may be biased. We need advice from other people to say, oh, I noticed that the person was really shifty when you asked about this or that, because they may notice things that you don't. Then you can do the personality profiling before you go for final interview.
My boss is a huge advocate of profiling. He does the bird profiling, the dove and the eagle, and obviously for a sales organization, he's looking for like the eagles kind of profile. But I've always felt that it doesn't really, the profile can come out one way, but it doesn't, I've never felt that it really translate into, or maybe that's just a system lah. Another profiling that I like is the 16 personalities type. Some people would swear by it in a way. Some people think that it's rubbish. I think just reading about it gives me some better understanding about myself or how I think. I think it's useful for a person, but I have never quite really decided whether profiling is useful in the hiring process.
I would say something that the tech field uses very often is DISC, because it's a communication style. You may have different preferences, but what makes sense to your comms? Because when you're working in a company, comms is the most important. So if you know a person is a facts and numbers person, and if I go into the person and start talking all my abstract stuff, the person would be very upset with me and be like, seriously, woman, why are you wasting my time? So there are firms who actually have like the DISC profile of various company stuff, and you say that, okay, like let's say you approach this person, here's a D. Just get straight to the point. Even if he's gruff with you, please forgive him. He did not mean it. If he was really gruff with you, find a proper time outside office. So that one was more specific for him. Like, find a time outside office and just tell me that that was inappropriate. I will try to change. So it's a lot of learning from each other too. And I think that is what I call a quick and dirty way. Usually there are stereotypes too, like if you deal with finance people, some joke that if they're not in sales, they're usually the C type. They want facts, they want numbers, they want roles, all these kind of things. But then again, there are also adaptations that we as humans have adapted to. Especially if you're in sales, you need to kind of quickly understand what the person really wants.
Yep.
If not, you will never get the call back again.
I suppose it's something that I would think that I am quite naturally gifted at, in a way sometimes. I call it like reading the weather of someone, or even just picking up very small details that tells you what a person is concerned about. For example, in the insurance process, you want to pick up whether if that person is more a big picture person that makes decision quickly and at a big picture level, or if the person is someone who would want you to go through the contract page by page, clause by clause, and be very careful about it. Do you watch Season Milan?
Yes.
Dog Whisperer?
Yes.
And he talks about this thing whereby it's like it's all dogs, so it's like species, right? Dogs. Then there's the breed. So a golden retriever might behave a certain manner, Rottweiler might have certain characteristics. Then lastly is the personality.
Yep.
Everyone is different. So
Yes.
I also have this thing as well. So when I size someone up, right, number
Mm.
one is like basic human psychology. Or what you talk about Maslow hierarchy of needs, Then the next thing for breed, right, is like certain occupations they tend to be more concerned about certain things.
Yes.
So if I'm talking to a lawyer today, a lawyer would probably want you to send a contract over for for them to read through the contract and to be
Yep.
comfortable with the contract.
Mm.
And lastly, it's a personality, right? You can't just say that I'm dealing with a lawyer, so I deal with a lawyer that way. There are still lawyers who are like, maybe he's the managing partner of like a huge firm, and he makes decision fast and he makes decision in a big picture manner. So some people get that naturally.
Yes.
Some people don't get that.
Mm.
And I suppose it's the people who don't get that you need to help them with, right?
Yeah, it's a bit because I came from a perspective where this did not come naturally. So everything was quick analysis and testing, literally testing on the many people who are in my life. So when you're a volunteer, there are a lot of people to test. So it's this whole lifelong thing where, even the people that I coach, I say that this is what I'd recommend, but please test it to see if it makes sense for you, because it may be very
Or
different.
if it works for you.
Yes. Because if someone cannot read the facial expression, like I do help some who have autism, they're very high flying, they can see nothing from the face. So I ask them to analyze the person's communication style instead. Because if this is blank, it doesn't work a lot. And I work with them to improve how they communicate with other people in less, I would say, fact dump on them.
Okay. I want to ask you a series of a few questions. Just to pick your brains about, some of the, you can say like hot topics lah, in
Yep.
terms of career and in terms of work culture. First thing is, there's a lot of talk about work-life balance. How do you see work-life balance?
Work-life balance is very important if you really don't like your job.
Okay.
Work-life balance is something that your work melds into your life, and then it is something that you just switch in and out like water flow. Or even there are people who have physical locations for different things. Like for you, you have this room for your hobbies in that sense. So that is where you escape your work.
Yep.
Then it might be better that way for some people to have clear demarcations. So I think it depends a lot on, firstly, how happy they are and how willing they are to do the work in their life. And if it's not at a happy place, they need a form of venting, release. Yeah.
For people my age, right, like early 30s, we often have to struggle with this dilemma of family work-life balance, especially when you have a young family.
Yes.
And we always read articles online like, when you're on your deathbed, the last thing you would be thinking is I didn't work hard enough. Or have you advised people who are in this dilemma whereby they are at a struggle whereby should they be spending more time with their family, or just due to the sheer demand of their work, they have to maybe leave their position? How do you advise people when it comes to that? Is there a right answer to that?
There's no right answer, but I would usually ask the person, what are your true values? What really makes you tick? Because there is an entrepreneur that I advise. For him, family is important above all else. So he is willing to take step backs in his career, or even find solutions. Maybe he gets paid less or all this, or maybe even his wife needs to take on maybe some freelancing role, because the both of them are synchronized in believing that family is the first and topmost. Whereas if money is the topmost, let's say you have lots of debts to pay and all this, then when you spend quality time with your family, make sure it's quality time, not distracted time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the second question. Especially in today's like sort of environment and culture, right? There is a lot of, can I say, hype about entrepreneurship. And there are a lot of people who aspire to start a business or to work for themselves or to have a startup. Working for self and working for people, how do you advise someone to assess whether, that level of awareness whereby I am more suitable to, actually, I'm not suitable to start a business. I'm better off working for someone. How do you walk someone through the process of, hey, maybe you are not cut out to run a business. Maybe you should bring your technical expertise to an organization instead and work for someone. And that will suit you better and make you a much happier person.
Yeah, I think a lot depends. For people in psychology, we get this thing often where people say, why does everything depend? So for a process, I'll walk a person through is, I'm a very pragmatic person. I'll ask them, is your skill sets monetizable? Or is your company going to be profitable within 1 to 3 years? Do you have the money to live like a broke student for even that runway? How willing are you to try out new ideas and pivot? Have you even piloted selling something small on the side? So all these, I will address it from the practical concern, because there's no point of having airy-fairy ideals when you are starving or you have like your HDB taken back. It makes no sense. Yeah. So if they can answer all these a bit more confidently, then go for it. Unless they were forced in circumstances like they were fired, they cannot find another job, then do something fruitful with your free time.
Okay.
Yeah.
The third question I want to ask is, how to ace job interviews?
How to ace job interviews? Nowadays, the bar is so high. Like, some time ago, I was dying of curiosity, so I randomly applied to a lot of jobs just to see how it would be like for a middle-aged worker returning to a field. I was even willing to take internships, so I had to go through a battery of, be it personality tests, cognitive tests, engineered tests where I was meant to fail. Even, and then now I would say a lot are virtual interviews. And then I would say how to ace them is really to build a brand for yourself. If possible, build a connection with the hiring manager. Show that you have a portfolio, you have the chops to do that job. Even if you don't have the formal background for it, you show that you have experience and interest in that field. Because this will give you an edge over, let's say, someone, we joke that, even if you came from Stanford, your entire year was spent on Zoom, so you just paid tons for Zoom classes. But if you do not have a portfolio to boost your claims, employers are skeptical nowadays. A lot of people claiming they can do this, they can do that, and they can't do the work. So you need to prove that you can do the work. You have somewhere where you are Googleable, searchable on LinkedIn or on the social media. Remember, no drunken pictures, partying, all this. Because
I suppose it's where LinkedIn comes in, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think social media is such that people have become a lot more comfortable inflating themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And the HRs and employees have to sort of sieve through the noise and to really find out who is the real stuff, who is the real deal.
Yeah. So it doesn't help that most HR actually use text scanners, TXT.
Okay.
And it is an AI that just grabs the keywords from your resume to make sure that they are dealing with someone who legitimately is worth a human's time.
Okay.
So a lot of people don't know this and they don't use the correct keywords. So now there's a lot more to do. You need to research what are the correct keywords, what this company is about.
Pertaining to that specific role.
Yes.
Okay. Are there some generic keywords that HRs are grabbing for? For example, like team player or
team player is
worker
overused.
is overused, right?
So now team player is so overused that it might be a flag where HR see it and they see that you're just doing a keyword dump.
Okay.
And they will be thinking, well, this person's using all the correct words, but it says nothing much about their accomplishment.
So it's all fluff lah.
Yes.
So what is it because we're talking about keywords, right? So what are some keywords that's like the trend now? Like
You
HR
need to know, like let's say for law. So there are many different areas of law, right?
Yep.
If you are, let's say, in regulations, you need to know all the compliance lingo and all this, because the tax scanner is scanning from inputs from both hiring manager and HR. But sometimes we have this joke running in HR that the hiring managers don't even know what they're asking for. This is especially for tech firms. So it's a balance. If you're in the tech field, it might be a HR who knows nothing about the tech. Then you have to add in some of these fluffy keywords. But if you are going for a bigger company that's more diverse, then you need a bit more your domain specific keywords.
Okay. Text scanners. Okay.
Yeah.
Last question. How should we deal with workplace abuse or workplace discrimination, workplace biasness?
Yeah, I would say it's firstly getting an objective sounding ear, because some people may feel very sensitive. Like, they may be just more sensitive by nature. So they may feel very victimized when the person may just be objectively stating a fact. So if you bounce off, and if it's really discrimination, if it's abuse, be it verbal abuse, sexual harassment and all this, it is to start looking for the relevant bodies where you can either lodge a complaint and all this. I would say sometimes your own HR may or may not be able to help you. Like, let's say if it's your direct manager, you might have to escalate it beyond. If it's a big company, escalate it to HR. Usually it can be dealt with. But if it's a small company, you might need to resort to, be it some maybe charities, where, let's say if it's women's issues and all this, or sexual harassment, it depends on your context. Do you have help and neutral bodies within the company? Or is the person so powerful that it makes no sense to fight against him or her?
Yeah, it might be the boss harassing you
Yeah, so then you have to bring it to the police.
in a small office,
Yeah. If it's physical, because I heard of this case recently where someone in the workplace was actually slapped by the boss physically. So we say that, you should totally either like report it to MOM or, even the police and all this, because he was physically slapped in front of everyone.
And it also means that you are prepared to walk away from a job.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's something that people always struggle with. Like, they know that escalating it would mean that they lose their job. And when someone, I suppose, is maybe mid-career, or someone really needs their job, needs their paycheck, and that's where they really struggle to... That's why every case is different, but...
Yeah, so this is something I tell a lot of people, but it's very difficult to execute in real life. Like in dating, right? As long as you're not in a committed relationship, you are always flirting. Always have backup options. Just as a career, a good backup option might be your side hustle. It might be something else that you can do. You can take a pay cut. Never let yourself be cornered. This is something like, the Three Kingdoms saying, 狗急跳墙. Never let yourself be that one who gets cornered. Yeah. So this is something that is in strategy for a lot of people with careers, that I think this is a human norm that we don't think of. Holu, our way of escape.
In other words, should someone always be on the hunt for their next job?
Always be building your portfolio so that you have something to fall back on, and your network. So these two are very important. Portfolio shows that you are a capable person in your domain. Your network is when you are really in hot soup. There are people you can call who can make calls on your behalf. Yeah.
I look at my sister as a very good example, because I'm the self-employed and she's the employee. She's an accountant. And she, for a period of time, for a number of years, she was constantly job hunting. She would leave her job for the next job that offers her higher $500, $300,
Yep.
And she'll make the jump. Of course, it's also a more reputable, bigger company. And I saw how her career has progressed in a very positive manner because of that ambitious nature of hers. If she had gotten a lot more comfortable, she wouldn't be where she is today.
Yep.
And that's where I sort of look at it and I think to myself, should someone be always job hunting?
I would say maybe not active, but always always be building something that you can fall back on. It doesn't need to be absolutely active. Your weekend does not need to be totally consumed with this.
Some people are lazy, pure lazy. So I will always tell people that, especially young people, I say number one, in fact, I just interviewed my previous guest. Is a student. He's a genius. He invents things. He's good at technical side of things. And he was asking me for, what should I do in terms of my career? How should I? And I tell him as a student, the first thing you want to do is you want to start your LinkedIn. You want to build your LinkedIn profile into something that's credible. And the second thing you want to do is, I told him that you should go and identify 10 ideal companies that you love to work for. For example, and you go and add and make connection with whoever you can find from these 10 companies.
Yep.
Or be like the managing director, the owner, just go and add them on LinkedIn. Just go and add them. Whether they accept you or not, it's okay.
Yeah, or even just follow them first.
Follow them, and when you post something, they might notice, and you never know that the job that you have been aspiring and craving for might come directly from them.
Yeah.
Through whatever branding that you have spoken about, that you have built online, on social media, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. People are just sometimes just lazy to do that.
Well, then, it's your life, right? If you're too lazy to do that, then you will just be like the masses. When crap hits the fan, then you deal with it then. Like what they say, either you have it hard when you're younger and have an easier life later, or you have it easy when you're younger and then you really suffer when you're older.
Or some people just go through life just being lost all the way.
Yes, there are. So it depends if they want to change their situation. That's where they hire coaches or all this or seek help. I've seen people mid-career, mid-age do a turnaround because they have absolutely hit their rock bottom. But I think it's human nature that until we reach that stage, I think someone said this, until the change of staying where you are currently is more than the pain of changing, most people wouldn't change.
But the dilemma sometimes is always that, when I hit rock bottom, right, when I lose my job, for example, if I lose my job, that's where I don't want to spend money to hire a coach or to hire an advisor to advise me on my next step. You know what I mean? And people who would take the step to hire a coach or to hire an advisor are people who naturally are already more self-motivated, more self-aware. And so that's the thing, right? And that's why your job, you work with a very niche group of people. Wow. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about neurodivergence people and your experience with adult ADHD. I've done my research, some of my research on ADHD, and like all some of all these conditions, right? It's all based on a diagnosis that a doctor makes and all. And sometimes, despite reading a lot of materials, it's still a bit confusing about what ADHD is. In your own words, what is ADHD?
It's a neurobiological condition for people who evolutionary, our genes were preserved because in the hunter-gatherer society, we were probably more of the hunters. We suited that type of lifestyle. But now that we are in a sit-down world of the gatherers, it doesn't make sense. And we have this internal engine that refuses to be turned off because we were made for the world where it was hunters.
Okay, interesting. Can you tell me more about that?
Okay, so there is this theory that says that because of the sleeping patterns, the ability to hyper-focus, the ability to, desire and seek the adrenaline rush, the dopamine, it makes them excellent hunters. It's like they can go for days on end without eating, just hunting for that one prey, chasing after that thrill. And then going back being celebrated as like, you know, the ones who provide for the village. Whereas the gatherers, we joke that they are more probably of the autism spectrum. They plan things to a T, the seasons, the irrigation, mathematically precise. So there was a need for these genes in our society. They promoted our survival. But in the world that, especially since the Industrial Revolution, we sit in classes for hours on end. We are expected to sit in factory-like places for long. And for people whose genes were made and conserved because of the hunt, they find themselves turning to destructive things.
So does it mean that because of how our society is structured now, right? Because people are born with ADHD,
Yes.
and because of, for example, the education system, when you are preschool, when you are in primary school, you have to go through that kind of learning style, and that's where ADHD gets further aggravated. Is that what it is?
In some sense, yes. And usually, because in medical society, they think it's more of a boys' issue. And with boys, it's a lot more disruptive and destructive. So therefore, they get hauled to the doctors much earlier. Whereas for female, it tends to be more daydreamy, inattention. And inattention is okay in a class of 40 people because inattention is okay. You just occasionally get
Like they're
scolded.
just in their own world.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They may be thinking about 1,001 thing, then the bird flies by, like, oh, shiny, that kind of thing. But it doesn't interfere with the discipline in the classroom, so it seldom gets flagged out for girls. Whereas boys will be, because they have naturally a lot more energy level, so they start running around, tearing up people's books just to get a reaction. And that reaction biologically gives them a dopamine hit. So it's like, oh, wow, okay, I get a thrill. So I should do this again. And when you're a kid, you don't think a lot about consequences.
When do you first find out that you have ADHD?
It was actually after after I failed my PhD, they thought I had a host of mental health issues, be it anxiety, depression. So I was a bit like a human guinea pig. They were testing all kinds of medication on me. Then I was switched to another psychiatrist, and when I was describing all my difficulties, because it also comes with executive function issues, blah, blah, blah. And because he was educated overseas, he says, oh, Cheyenne, I think you might have ADHD. And, you know, when my parents were asked for the interview as part of the diagnosis, it was confirmed because my mom behaved like that too.
Okay.
So in a sense that it's just that hers is probably untreated because in our parents' era, there's no such thing. Then kids were just meant to sit still. Yeah, so it was more because of that. And when they tested a series of ADHD medications for me, then one of them worked quite well for me, and I've been on it ever since.
So in your entire childhood, you never knew that you had ADHD?
I was just the weird one out, so
Okay.
it didn't really matter. Then with my people skills, my thrill was more,
Like what you say, you managed to get by
yeah,
with your other things to cover up for.
yes. And I read pretty well. I read like about 300 books a year, even though I'm dyslexic. But if you ask me to read dictation, that's when I die so horribly.
So you only know you have ADHD as an adult, and what's the treatment process like for ADHD? Do you have to constantly take medication on a daily basis, or is it?
For me, it's not that bad because maybe I'm an adult. So I roughly, and I've been testing on myself, with myself my whole life, be it on human interactions or with caffeine, medications, not medications, more like caffeine. I know when days I need it, like let's say the paperwork days, or when I was in civil service, yes, I will take my medication because it can be 4-hour meetings after 4-hour meetings. My attention just goes kaput after the first hour.
How does it manifest in terms of when do you know that your attention goes kaput? What do you do when it goes kaput?
I usually need to fidget a lot, so I've developed the skills of fidgeting subtly, chewing on my pen or pencil until the whole top is like mutilated. Then I would also take my medications, and I have been trying, even diet-wise, I cut down on refined sugars because they don't help with my attention. So it's a lot of nutritional habits, even the way I live my life, like productivity. Like sometimes before a meeting, I'll actually walk up and down the stairs until I get the high. Okay, then I go back to the meeting. When I do my paperwork, I actually balance my laptop on one hand and I pace the corridors. Yeah, so that's how I get my work done.
Okay. What do you feel is the biggest misunderstanding that people have about ADHD?
I get this quite often. They just say, Cheyenne, you're just lazy.
Why do they say that you're lazy? Like, is there a particular example? Because you didn't do something? Or because you didn't meet a deadline?
It's usually like, rushing like crazy before a deadline. And I could have planned it out a lot better, but I didn't want to. I tried and I sat there and I stared at the empty sheets for hours on end. And I've had managers tell me, it's like, Cheyenne, stop using your condition as a crutch. You're so obviously smart. Why can't you do this? Why can't you just get a grip on yourself? I say, well, if I could, I would, because for me, I have very bad short-term memory. Sometimes I just turn my head and I literally forget what I was about to say. I'm like, I sound more like old person in the aspect that it's not as if I wish this on myself, but if I could, I would have loved to remember everything, but I cannot. Then even out of good intentions, I really sit there and I start typing. Things just don't come out. I edit the thing for like 6 hours. Then when the deadline's the next day, oh my goodness, everything flows. I really wish I didn't live like that. So now now that I've realized this, and exercise is a huge part of managing the ADHD condition. So I know that if my body literally needs that kick before I start doing anything vaguely boring or paperwork wise, I'll just do exercise, start jumps, walk up and down the stairs until I'm sweating, then go and tackle the thing with my medications and all this.
There's also two types of ADHD, right? One is the passive.
Yeah, one is the more inattention type.
Yeah.
Then one is the more like hyperactive type. Yeah.
So yours is the more inattention type.
Yeah, but exercise still helps. And I think a lot of kids, they are raised with such short attention spans. It's like the younger generation, they're becoming ADHD by nurture, not just by nature. I'm sure you've heard of it in Silicon Valley. A lot of the top Silicon honchos don't actually let their kids touch a single digital screen until the kid's like 10. And all the advertisements, they're all actually meant to hijack the brain's dopamine to make you, like want it. Like that's why TikTok's so popular. 3 seconds, 3 seconds.
Swipe, swipe, swipe.
Yes.
Even when kids, nowadays when parents go out for a meal with their kids, the most easy way out is to just put a tablet in front of the kid or even the phone in front of the kid.
Yes.
And actually, if you notice what the kids are watching on the tablet, sometimes they are not actually watching anything.
No.
Like they are switching between this and that on YouTube. Like they don't have the patience to even finish a 5 minutes video.
I think someone was telling me the YouTube algorithm has come to a point where you need to be captivating within the first even 3 to 5 seconds. If not, then
or even the thumbnail.
Yes.
People don't even give a video a chance if your thumbnail is not captivating enough.
Yeah, so in the sense that I think we're moving to a society that by nurture, we are becoming a bit more ADHD. I think this is both a blessing and a curse.
Why is it a blessing?
They want things fast, they want things quick, they can do it. Like, I think there was a study where they showed that, gamers have the ability to, let's say, map out a field very quickly. Like, let's say there were 20 dots on it. A typical person who is not a gamer can map out like 10 dots within a very short time frame, whereas a gamer gets usually about 17 to 18 and they game the system. So in a sense that their brains are geared for that. They may do very well in the digital age. We are already in the digital age, but with AI and all this, but it's to manage the downsides.
So do you declare ADHD to people you work with?
When I was an employee, for sure no. Because they see it more as a curse. They see it as someone who might be disruptive or destructive.
And maybe there's just lack of awareness and understanding about what the condition is about.
Could be. I mean, in, let's say, my parents' era, all this, Richard Branson's one of those. He has very obvious ADHD traits. But he put it to good use because he was obsessed with his businesses. So it can be put to good use. It's just that if it's something, I think a lot of us don't do well in the procedural stuff. Like SOP, there's no reason to follow certain things. Then
I'm very bad at that. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are people who love that. That's why I advocate that, go do stuff according to your strengths. No matter how much you try, you are just going to be not good.
Okay. What was the experiment that you did on seeking employment and declaring that you have ADHD?
Yeah, so it's just using different variations of my name. One that I use specifically to declare that I have ADHD because under the medical conditions usually they mean physical, but at that time I wasn't sure. So I decided to send the same resume with just different names. One's only my Chinese name, one's only my English name. Then, one declared, one not declared. Everyone that I've declared, no one called me back. The ones that I didn't declare, I did get calls for interview or maybe like send in more details, blah, 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 this kind of thing. So yes, you can say that it was my own experiment, but to me, it was just another data point of how I should make this whole job search easier for me.
Well, I mean, in a way, I'm sure it didn't come as a surprise to you, right?
Nope.
So
I just wanted to know if this assumption is really true. Yeah.
So as someone who has, very, in a way, been open to talking about it on very public platforms, or like like your interview with the mainstream media, or even coming on this podcast and talking about your struggles with adult ADHD. What is the message that you hope people in the society generally hear about adult ADHD or even some other conditions that people have?
Well, it's not laziness because a lot of us do try much harder than the general population. I think even from doing like push-ups and star jumps before meetings just to make sure that we are there for the meeting. And we have our own talents. If the fact that genetically the genes were conserved more as hunters, think of us more as the people who can go for the kill, who can, if motivated correctly with the right goals, can go all the way. And there are things that we are not good at, but there are people who are good at the things that we are not good at. So it's like, we are not our failures.
Okay, so in a way, does it mean that there are certain roles, occupations, or jobs that ADHD are more suitable for?
It needs to be a job that gives them the adrenaline rush. So I know of someone who's in banking, but specifically the fraud and investigation side.
Okay.
So that one, you can say it's a very paper-based or even like table-based job, but to them the thrill of
catching that fish.
Yes.
Okay.
So that works for them. It may be very different because it needs to be within their interest. Some may have changing interests throughout their whole life. So for me, it was the thrill of getting deals done that were outside of research or making interdisciplinary stuff work. So I can do my science. I just prefer the thrill of getting deals done and all this. That's all.
Okay. So what's your goal in 2021 or the next 3 years or the next 5 years? How do you set goals for yourself? Oh, before I come to this question, I wanted to ask you one question that I forgot to ask.
Yes.
You talk about leadership, and do you have a leader that you look up to, be it anyone, a business leader, a political leader, or someone in history? Like who do you look up to?
I have quite a lot of leaders I look up to for specific aspects. Some may be dictators actually, like Julius Caesar. History writes him as this long rope flowing person, but he was actually, he almost committed genocide and all this. But I would say I admire him for his raw ambition and the change that he did for society. Then also Lee Kuan Yew, he's a very pragmatic person. There are things that I do not agree with him, like his saying that, intelligence is inherited, blah, blah, blah. But I
You don't
see
agree with that? The intelligence is inherited to a certain extent?
some yes, some no. In a sense that, if you're born with intellectual disability, that's a whole
Yeah.
different ballgame.
Okay. Generally?
Generally, I would say that you can improve your lot in life. Maybe not by that much, but at least you're not that bad.
His theory about how when he was a bit more, when Singapore was still not so open, and he always say that a graduate should marry a graduate,
Yeah.
right? And he is someone who is huge on genes.
Yeah,
He
so
believes in.
that part I don't really agree, but there are some of the things like he as a leader, right? Like his fiery debates with Goh Keng Swee and all this, right? He is a maverick by nature, but our society has turned into a society where we do not tolerate mavericks. So it is more like he was suitable for the times in 时势造英雄.
Yep.
So he was correct for the times, and I think a lot of leaders need to see the times that they are in, the context that they are in. Julius Caesar was also correct for the times that he was in. The other Roman emperors, questionable stuff. And also, even with the Chinese history, I would say Liu Bei is a very good leader in a certain sense. He's very good in the 收买人心 because history, we say it's usually written by the victors. But how did, quote unquote, a loser get to write the most stunning story? Because he won the hearts and minds of people.
And he's a bit manipulative as well.
A bit. But
In terms of the 收买人心 part. He's good at that naturally.
Very.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whereas you look at Cao Cao, he's a bit more like the old man style. It's like my way or the highway. You can, I don't mind, like especially chilling is when he says that I would rather betray the whole world than for the world to betray me. He is also a product of his time, but he is pretty capable, I would say, because he created order out of a failing empire. But his methods, disputable. So I would say that I learn a lot from all these leaders, and it really depends both internally and externally. Yeah. Because you know also Guan Gong, what's his name in Chinese?
Guan Yu.
Yes, Guan Yu. He would have just been a normal archer if not for the times that he's in.
Yep.
But now he's revered as a god too. So it's both combinations.
People sometimes don't understand that it's 时势造英雄 and it's not 英雄造时势.
It's very hard.
No, it's
Yeah.
obviously that it's 时势造英雄.
Yeah.
I think people who would even think that they can be so good enough, it just tells me that they have probably a too big an ego. If you look at in today's time, right? There has been a lot of talk about Elon Musk recently. And if you look at his brilliance, he is made for the time.
Yes.
Like his brilliance, if he is born in just 50 years earlier,
Yeah.
you wouldn't. He might still be a very successful entrepreneur or inventor, but this tech era has made him who he is today. What about someone who is living, like not a history character?
Someone who's living, I would need to think.
Do you generally admire like leaders from a certain sector, or leaders from certain like political leaders or business leaders, or?
I would say it's more of reading history and kind of seeing the societal changes, because I think one of my core value is transformation. So it's transformation, be it organizational, country, or even personal. And that's why the leaders I tend to look for are more transformational. I would say one of the living leaders is Richard Branson, because after reading his books and all this, it gave me the assurance to live life, my kind of weird. And if he can pull it off, of course, he was also born for the times. His
Like no apologies, right? Whatever he has done.
Yeah, but he is also ethical.
Yep.
And he's quite a philanthropist. He's quite different from, the usual perception of philanthropists who are in it for their egos or like the family empire and all this. You can see it's also part of his character and his marketing and his charisma. I have heard that he's very good with people too, but to me, he's both charismatic, influential, and unabashedly weird.
So you're also going through this transformational period your own self, right? Am I right to say that? So what are your goals for 2021 or the next 3 years or the next 5 years? Where do you see yourself at ultimately in this particular stage of your life?
I would say it's for the coaching and the business advisory to really take off, meet with the right people, to form communities where it is made of ethical power brokers. And they may not be super power brokers, but I would say maybe each owner, each C-suite, they are power brokers in their own sense. And to be ethical, to do good in the society, to maybe counteract things that are old that probably should no longer be around. Yeah, so this is what I am looking forward to building a community like that.
What's this community? Is it
It's more like the people whom I advise on,
okay, your clients and
be it my clients and all this, but also maybe eventually this informal network where people can meet other like-minded people, maybe people who are more open-minded, who are willing to put aside the old things if they no longer work. Yeah, so it's more building towards that, I would say.
Okay, so in a very condensed manner, right, who are the people who should be looking for you
Who are the people who are
for in terms of your consulting and your
So for my consulting, it will be if you're a leader of a small medium enterprise, you have people issues that you would like help with, and you have a good heart in a sense that you want to be ethical. You are not into manipulating people for the sake of manipulating. And also for people who are in large companies or even in civil service, if you desire to be a leader, even though you are not the chosen ones, maybe amongst your peers, but you desire to be a leader, to be an influence for good, you desire to make a positive change wherever you are, then these are the people who can look for me.
Okay, and how should they get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm still trying to grapple with the privacy issues, so I can also be contacted on Facebook, and I'm in the midst of setting up my company now at this point, waiting for approvals, stuff like that. More information will be found on mainly LinkedIn and Facebook.
Can you spell your LinkedIn profile so people who's listening to the audio podcast can search for you?
Yeah, so my LinkedIn profile, I think I'm the only one at this point, is Cheyenne Seah, Cheyenne space SEAH.
Okay, do you have anything else to add, Sharon?
No. It's been an enjoyable conversation.
Great.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I have had a very good one. In fact, I feel that because of the year that we had, right, 2020, a lot of people are probably feeling a bit lost, because of circumstances or because it's a year whereby, blessing these guys, they managed to get some time off to reflect about where they are and where they want to go to. And the gym example that you brought up is very, very true. I'm someone who I sign up for gym membership, I'll go, but at the same time, when I go there, I'm a lost sheep. I fiddle around with this machine, I fiddle around with the weights, I go on a treadmill, I run for like 30 minutes, and I go home feeling a bit not satisfied about what I've done. So I've always felt that I would do a lot better with a coach. And you advisor, a coach, whereby you communicate with them what you hope to achieve, and through their expertise, they are able to advise you on a certain set of, it's a regime, right?
Yeah, and I think the good thing about having coaches is that a lot of them kind of have a sense of your potential, so they will push you past the pain.
Yeah.
Because it is only the pain, be it physical or emotional growing, that you become a much better person. Like in gym, they always say no pain, no gain. But of course, it's not the pain where you injure yourself. So that's where their expertise sees to a point where, okay, I push you. Maybe you used to be able to do 10. Now let's do 30. You probably think you want to die. But at the end of 30, you're like, hey, I could actually do 30. So that becomes your new benchmark.
And it's also a lot about having someone that you're accountable to as well.
Yes.
I always feel that this person can come in many forms and shape. It can be your wife.
Yes.
That, especially for people like me, right? It's easy to keep track of your production and your KPIs because you bring in a certain amount of revenue every year.
Yes.
And your wife will be like, I'm not married yet, but I can imagine the wife will be like, hey, this year, But it's always when someone who is not in such a obvious role whereby they need someone to just sort of be accountable to.
And I would say for closer relationship, it is sometimes not advisable because it's like familiarity breeds contempt. So sometimes you get annoyed with the person. And the last thing you'd want is very few people can work and be in a personal relationship with the same person throughout. Like usually there will be conflicts. Then how do you resolve the conflict? So like especially for a lot of us, we can relate to the fact that parents tell us to do certain things. We know it's good for us, but we are still annoyed when they tell us. So you need someone who has the emotional distance from you. Yeah. So that's why usually coaches are employed because they have that emotional distance. The peer pressure is somewhat on you also because you're like, oh no, I'm going to look bad in front of the other person. Whereas my family has seen all the bad stuff already. It doesn't matter.
Do you work with people on like a retainer basis or like a contract basis or a session by session basis?
I usually work on a retainer basis because we joke that once it rains, it doesn't just rain, it pours. So usually the HR or human issues comes all at one shot. Then a retainer basis is the best. Like usually they just use the retainer like, once or twice a month, they give me a call, like, just summarize the whole thing, what they're dealing with. Because sometimes it's when they're telling all these things, then I say, hey, you sound a little too stressed. You might be pushing yourself a little too hard, or sometimes I'll ask them to repeat, like, oh, can you tell me what do you tell your staff? Then they will say, and I say, are you sure that will really sit well with your high performance? And they'll be like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have said this to that person. Yeah, so sometimes a retainer works better because in the sense that it's like a joker card that they always have at the backpack. But sometimes something I recommend is going through especially if you're a new leader for the first 100 days. More than 50% of leaders in the first 100 days actually are so unaware of some pitfalls that they actually become the scapegoat for blame. That's the last thing you as a new leader want, to become a scapegoat. So usually the first 100 days is something more intense. I would try to meet them like once a week to make sure that they are on track. And it's pretty much, even Harvard psychology says, once you make a good impression or a bad impression on someone, it takes about 8 positive impressions to just make them change their impression about you. So the first 100 days is something that
Very crucial.
Yeah.
Okay, if not, I thank Cheyenne for coming and having this very great, meaningful conversation with me. I look forward to having you again once you have sort of like concluded and achieved what you want to achieve during this phase of your career. And I'm sure we'll have a very good conversation again about what you have done.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thank you so much. And if you have not subscribed or you have not, be having 2 episodes per week. And we'll be having a lot more interviews and a lot more conversations with people, pick their brains, and hopefully it brings you lots of value. Please look forward to the next episode of Life's Alright podcast. Thank you, Cheyenne.
Thank you.
I think it's good.
Yeah, it's good.
1 hour, 30 minutes.
Cool.